In our last video, we took a look at case statements or switch statements, doing some basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and we said we need to learn how to create our own methods. So the goal of this video today is to pick up where we left off. We're going to update our code, and we're going to take each of these and put them in their own method. Now, when you're creating your own methods, there's a couple important things to know. You have to put it in the right spot. For example, these curly braces do correspond to something specific, and there are 3. This last one down here says we are at the end of our class, our public class that we created, which was calculation or calc. Then we had the second ending curly brace, which corresponds to our main method, and this one which corresponds to our switch statements. So when we're creating our own methods, it has to go inside the class, but it has to go outside the main method. You can't put a method inside of a method. That would be pretty pointless and wouldn't know when to execute. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our own method. Now, the first operation we had was addition. We have num1 and num2. When you're creating your own main or your own public method, you have to do a few things. So the first one we're going to do is public static, and we'll talk about why it has to be public static. We have to give it a name. We're going to call ours add numbers. We're going to open our parentheses, and we have to put what's called formal parameters inside these parentheses. So you'll hear people talk about, they'll use the word parameters. In Java, there are 2 types of parameters. There are actual parameters and formal parameters. When you're doing your method heading, which is this right here, this is our method head, our method heading. This is it right here. The parameters that go inside these parentheses are called formal parameters. And you need to dimensionalize them. So we're going to have 2 because we need to accept num1 and num2. So we're going to do a and b, but we have to dimensionalize a and b. Because num1 is an integer, I'm going to make a an integer. Because num2 is an integer, I'm going to make b an integer. I open my curly brace, I have my closed curly brace, and I have an error. There's a reason we have an error. When you're doing your method, because we're going to return something, because it is a return method, we have to dimensionalize what is the data type it's going to return. We're going to return an integer. So add numbers is going to return an integer. It's going to accept 2 parameters, num1 and num2. So now I'm going to return a plus b. And just like that, with our semicolon, we are done. Now what we need to do is go back to our switch statement, and we need to update it. If you didn't watch our last video, we talked about what all this code does. If you have some coding experience and you're familiar with switch statements, by all means, feel free to pause the video, copy the code here, and pick up with us when you have it all copied. So go ahead and pause here. Moving down, you go ahead and pause here, and then you can update it with us. Okay, so here we have case 1, we need to call add numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to do answer becomes equals, remember as becomes, answer becomes add numbers. Now, I put my semicolon and boom, I have an error. Why do I have an error? That's the name of my method. And the reason you have an error is you have 2 formal parameters, which means we need to input our 2 actual parameters. And that's what we call the parameters in the method call. We're calling add numbers, and then we need to pass down the actual parameters, which is going to be num1, num2. You do not need to declare num1, num2 because inside this method call, because they've been declared earlier in our code. You don't need to declare them. Now we're going to get rid of this line of code right here because we tested our code earlier. We saw that it works. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and in one line have it print out. So let's talk about going back to our formal parameters real quick, just so you understand how this works. We are creating a copy of num1 and inserting it into A. We are making a copy of num2 and inserting it into a variable B. That is what we are doing. When we return A plus B, that is what answer becomes. So when we actually print out answer, it's going to print the result of A plus B, which is num1 plus num2. All right, for case 2, we need to create another method. And we'll talk about what this public static is in a minute. Now, remember, public static, what is the data type that's going to be returned? It's going to be an integer. All of these are going to be integers. And we're going to call this sub numbers for subtract. And I'm going to do the same thing. int a, int b. Boom. And we're good to go. So what we need to do now, you'll notice we have another error. That's because it's not returning anything, but we're just going to return a minus b. Our third method is going to be molt numbers, and we'll update all the case statements in a moment once we get our methods written, and then of course we will test them. So we return a multiplied by b. And then we have our last one here. Oh, don't forget your semicolon. Public static int, that's the data type that's going to be returned. Remember, it's going to return an integer. Now, we talked about casting in a couple of videos earlier. For this project, when we talked about doing it, we said we're going to do simple multiplication. We're going to use two numbers that divide evenly into a whole number. You can change it if you would like later. It's up to you. All right, intb, we have our data types. We're going to return a divided by b and our semicolon. Now, what we need to do is we need to go up and we change our case statements. In case 2, I'm just going to call sub numbers. I'm going to pass down num1 and num2. It does matter what order you pass them in. For example, we have int a. Whatever the first parameter is, the first actual parameter in the method call corresponds to the first variable that you put down here. So num1, because it's first, it's going to correspond to variable a, which is of the integer data type. Num2 is going to correspond to b. So the order does matter, and that's why we have it in that order. We're going to go ahead and get rid of this line of code. For case 3, we're going to call molt numbers, and we're going to pass down num1, num2. We're going to get rid of this line right here, and we are almost done. And then we're going to have div numbers, and then num1, num2. And get rid of this line. Now, we said we're going to get it printed out after we exit this our switch statements or our multiple selection statements, because there are multiple selections a user can make. What we're going to do is we're going to do system.out.println, and we're going to say the answer is, and then what we're going to do is answer. And then that will, it will print it out and we can have it all at one time. So no matter what the answer is. Okay, so we said we're going to talk about this public static. What that means is public means it can be accessed from any single class. Like right now, we're only working with one class, so that really doesn't matter too much, but it's good practice because as you start creating multiple classes, you may want to access any method. Static. Here's what static means. Static means it's being accessed from within the class it is written, because we are accessing it from our main class, which is calc, or our only class, calc. We're making it static. That's why it's static. It means it's being accessed from within the class that it is in. That's all it means. Remember, the int here is the data type that's going to be returned. We have the name of our method, add numbers. And then we have what we call our formal parameters. We have dimensionalized both a and b as integers. And this whole thing right here is called our method header. This type of method that returns a value is known as a return method. If you go back up here to our public static void, well, void means it's not a return method, it's just a method. For example, main does not return anything. That's why it's void. It's either going to be a void method where it doesn't return anything, or it's going to be a return method when it does return something. Because this is a return method, I must have the statement return. If I do not, it will give me that error. If I don't have public static, I'm going to get an error. And the error is going to be that it cannot refer to a static, and here it is right here, non-static method. It needs to be static because it's within the class. So I'm going to go back here and put public static, and then we're good to go, and that error will disappear. The only thing left to do is compile our code and make sure it works. So we're going to be using num1, we're going to be using the value of 10. Num2, we're going to use the value of 5, and we should make sure we get all the right answers. So let's go ahead and compile here. No syntax errors. We can close out our code window. We're going to right click. Now you'll notice you have new methods to choose from. Add numbers, sub numbers, div numbers, mult numbers. We want to start with our main method, so we're going to click on void main. So we're going to hit OK. So this looks familiar. What mathematical operation do you want to do? We'll start with addition. 10, second number 5, comes out to 15. Works perfectly. Let's run it again. Now, in an upcoming video in just a little bit, we'll talk about how to get something to loop so we won't have to run it multiple times. We're just not ready for that yet. There's a few other things we need to learn, so that way when we use loops, we can take everything we've learned previously and incorporate it. Subtraction. 10 and 5 should come out to 5. It does. Beautiful. The third one is multiplication. That should come out to 50 because 10 times 5 is 50. And then the last one, 10 divided by 5, that will come out to 2, which I'm sure you know. So 10 and 5, the answer is 2. So that's it for this video. Remember, in this video, what we did was we updated our code. We, instead of having multiple system print lines, we just have one. And then the reason for that is we've already tested our code to make sure the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division works in the previous video. And then we learned how to create our own return methods. And you may be saying, well, why would you not just leave it inside the switch or case statements? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, we can keep our code more organized. We can also, if we ever need to add num1 and num2 again anywhere in our program, we already have the code written. Instead of typing it all over again, we can simply call this return method. If there's an error inside my add numbers, I don't need to look through several lines of code trying to figure out what's going on or why it doesn't work. You know, did I overwrite num1, num2 accidentally? I can look right here. Well, there's only one line of code, so it's very easy to debug or fix. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. If you have any suggestions, please leave that below. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next video.